Kayfabe is life here at WhatCulture Towers. It's why if you ever visit, I'll take you for a pint of vodka, feed you a few cheeky lines of Peruvian party powder, and love you wrong all night long. All while singing a jingle. It'll be absolute hell. However, kayfabe is pretty much on its last legs in the wrestling industry, with stars repeatedly breaking characters with fans, each other, and even the entire world on syndicated TV. Things weren't always this way, however, and before the business was completely exposed, kayfabe wasn't just an expectation, but a requirement. Wrestlers were method actors charged with the task of maintaining the illusion at all costs. With this in mind, I'm Jules for WhatCulture.com, aka the gentlest lover in real life, and these are 10 incredible stories of wrestlers' dedication to their character. Number 10. Blindness turns the Sandman into a hermit. The beer-guzzling, chain-smoking, Singapore cane-swinging Sandman didn't exactly come off as a wrestling traditionist on camera, but he was always dedicated to preserving kayfabe behind the scenes. The most famous example of this came in 1994 when the Sandman had a lit cigarette flicked into his eye during an I Quit match with Tommy Dreamer, which effectively, air quotes, blinded his character. Sandman soon revealed to the world that he would have to retire as a result of his injuries, and spared no effort in selling this condition. As revealed by Paul Heyman in WWE's Rise and Fall of ECW documentary, Sandman rendered himself housebound during the angle and even went so far as to having his wife take care of simple acts like answering the door for him because he was still very much blind. The former ECW champion even played blind in public just to get the angle over, which is actually a smart move as the company's events almost exclusively took place in Philadelphia, which just happened to be where he lived. Number 9. Bray Wyatt goes to court. In this day and age, Bray's spooky Swamp Thing super dude ego is about as credible as Adam Cleary telling a prospective young talent that he can help her get into show business. But back in the day, his Bayou bad boy persona got off with a bang, and this was all down to his fanatical adoption of his character. The former Husky Harris pulled out all the stops and dressed in full regalia at every opportunity, including a court of law. Yes, that's right, Bray Wyatt actually once showed up in court and didn't break character once. I would have killed to have seen him on the witness stand and just the look of confusion on everyone else's faces. Oh, can you imagine if he brought in the rocking chair? Brilliant. Number 8. The Ultimate Warrior changes his name. Few wrestlers have been as intense, over-the-top, and completely preposterous as the Ultimate Warrior. From his bulging muscles and colourful face paint to the nonsensical, babbling promos, Warrior was one of a kind, for better or worse. There was a very thin line between the Ultimate Warrior and the man behind the gimmick. However, Jim Hellwig was notorious for his instability, and essentially became his TV character after splitting from WWE in the early 90s. He was so dedicated to the act that he took the WWE to court over their continued use of the Warrior's name and likeness in 1996 and won, making him the first man in wrestling history to successfully sue his own gimmick. Believe it or not, things went even further when in 1993 he legally changed his name to Warrior, meaning that his widow and daughters are now all warriors. Truly, this was his ultimate act of dedication. Number 7. Sabu refuses to speak English after breaking his neck. As the nephew of the original Sheik, Sabu used a similar gimmick to the Arabian Madman, which meant that he was billed from Saudi Arabia and rarely spoke a word of English. Sabu's ECW character was mute until 1997 when he finally broke his silence, calling Taz a f***ing midget on television. Top lad. He was extremely dedicated to maintaining the character on screen and off, with the most notorious example coming in 1994 when Chris Benoit broke his f***ing neck. As legend goes, Sabu refused to communicate with the doctors at the hospital for several hours, thus preventing them from treating him. Paul Heyman was forced to speak on the wrestler's behalf, but it soon became apparent that Sabu would have to break his silence for his health's sake, and finally, he relented. Perhaps though we shouldn't be too surprised, because this is, after all, a man who once taped his broken jaw closed for the sake of not cutting a match short. F***ing hell, man. That's f***ing mental. I call my mum if I even get a splinter. Number 6. The Good Morning Kuwait incident. There are dozens of stories of wrestlers going nuts on outsiders who dare utter the word fake in their presence, but the 1997 Good Morning Kuwait incident is pretty much the cream of the crop. Host Bassam Al-Otman uttered the dreadful F-word while interviewing Taker and Vader, and while the dead man was clearly annoyed, Vader went full on Fruit Loops. The mastodon leaped from his chair, tipped a table, and grabbed the host host by the throat, screaming, "Does this feel fake? Does it?" The whole thing was later revealed as a premeditated stunt with everyone but Bassam in on the act. But that doesn't change the fact that Vader essentially spent a weekend in jail for the sake of standing up for his character's integrity. The Mastodon was eventually allowed to leave the country after paying a big fine, but wrestling was banned in Kuwait for 10 years afterwards, though it's unclear if these two were tied. Number 5. Goldust offers to get breast implants. I love Goldust. His flamboyant persona is as memorable as it is bizarre, and while his ambiguous sexual overtones were eventually toned down as part of the WWE's shift to a more family-friendly product, Dustin Runnels was entirely committed to the act. So committed, in fact, that he offered to permanently alter his body for the sake of a TV character. Apparently, Goldust had approached Vince with the idea that his character should get himself a set of fake breasts. McMahon ultimately declined, but Vince Russo later suggested that Goldust would have absolutely done it if the chairman had paid him $1 million. And apparently the boss took it under legitimate consideration. Runnels has done plenty of things to get his character over that most other performers wouldn't even consider. But while the implants would have definitely helped him stand out, Vince probably made a wise decision in saying no. This being clearly too weird for the man who once pursued an incest angle. Number 4. The Wild Samoans get arrested for kayfabe. Afa and Sika were a tag team for close to 30 years and portrayed a set of uncivilized wild men on television. They communicated only through primitive grunts, with manager Captain Lou Albano doing their talking, and would often eat raw fish, pick their noses, and rip dead chickens apart to put themselves over as ferocious savages, or as we know them here, people from Gateshead. However, according to Hulk Hogan's biography, he was traveling with the Wild Samoans when they were pulled over on a freeway. A gun that Hogan had recently bought fell out of a glove box like a comedy movie, and as an unregistered firearm would have meant jail time. All three were arrested. Now, the Wild Samoans had nothing to do with the gun, obviously, and though Hulk Hogan pleaded with them to explain the misunderstanding, they refused. Instead, they stayed quiet, only breaking their silence to occasionally grunt at the officer, even though both men spoke perfect English. Afa and Sika decided that staying true to their characters was more important than potentially heading to jail, and refused to speak up for themselves prior to their eventual release. Number 3. Nikita Koloff goes full Russian. Professional wrestling just loves an evil Russian. I mean, just look at Glow, aka the best wrestling thing since The Wrestler. Nikita Koloff stands as one of the gimmick's most famous practitioners, and like all good foreign heels, his life exploited real-life paranoia. In his case, he managed to turn the Cold War into some real heat. Like so many other foreign menaces, however, Nikita wasn't actually Russian. Rather, he was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota as Nelson Scott Simpson, and only adopted the character to get over as a wrestler. But over soon went overboard, as Simpson legally changed his name and then learned how to speak Russian. He hired an interpreter to communicate for him and persisted with the act all the way from his debut in 1984 to his eventual retirement in 1992. And it even took 2 years after that he'd finally dropped the Russian accent, though he still lives as Nikita Koloff to this very day. Number 2. El Santo refuses to unmask. Few things are more precious to Lucha Libre than the sanctity of a luchador's mask, and few wrestlers understood this better than El Santo. He was a Mexican icon, with his famous silver mask symbolic of his heroism, and he dominated the ring and mass media for many years. Santo's image was vital to his success, and after debuting in 1934, he resolved to never show his face in public. Thus, he wore his mask everywhere, whether it was out for a meal or walking down the street, and even went to insane lengths to protect his identity, like traveling separately from the rest of the crew so that no one would see his face when he was asked to remove his disguise at customs. The most remarkable part of this story is its length, though. Santo's wrestling career lasted for an astonishing 42 years, but he stayed true to his gimmick even in retirement, and didn't unmask until January 1984, when he finally showed his face before a TV audience. El Santo sadly passed away from heart failure 1 week later, and was fittingly buried in his mask. And number 1, Mr. Wrestling No Sells a plane crash. Better known as the Master Mr. Wrestling, Tim Woods was part of the sport's most infamous disasters in 1975. A plane carrying himself, Ric Flair, Johnny Valentine, and a host of others ran out of fuel and crash-landed just short of the intended destination, with only promoter David Crockett emerging unscathed. Now, Mr. Wrestling was a top babyface at the time, while Valentine was a hated villain. Woods didn't want the public to know that faces and heels had actually been traveling together, so he gave a fake name when he was admitted to the hospital and returned to work work just 2 weeks later, though clearly struggling from the accident. Woods chose to maintain his character by effectively no-selling a life-or-death situation, which epitomizes the protect the business at all costs mentality that existed in those days. He stayed active in wrestling until his eventual retirement in 1983 and denied his involvement in the crash for decades, before Ric Flair eventually revealed the truth in his 2004 autobiography.
I am defiant.
I am defiant. I am defiant. Defiant.
I am defiant.
I am defiant.
I am the villain.
We are defiant.
And that's our list. Let us know what other wrestlers refuse to break kayfabe in the comments section below, and then why not swing by WhatCulture.com for more news and articles like this every goddamn day. As always, I've been Jules, you've been awesome, and I'll speak to you soon.